Hi, I am Jacob Heilbrunn, the editor of The National Interest, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our webinar today. And Samir Sinijlawi will be a little late, so we're going to begin with Ronit Levine, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Tel Aviv and a scholar at the University of Pittsburgh Center for Governance and Markets, which happens to be headed by our second speaker, Professor Jennifer Murtazashvili, who is not only an expert on Central Asia, but has also written extensively on the Middle East. And Ronit has a new article, as it happens, in the National Interest, which has the title, "A Ceasefire Alone Won't Result in Israeli-Palestinian Peace." And Ronit, I'd like you to kick off by telling us why that's the case.
All right. So thank you very much, Jacob and Jennifer, for hosting this event. And I know some people are waiting for Hamas's reply to the proposal or the plan laid out by President Trump. But the entire idea behind this piece was to say that regardless of Hamas's reply, even if we were to secure ceasefire now, which I truly hope would happen, it won't lead us to enduring peace in the Middle East. And these are the words that were used by President Trump and by Prime Minister Netanyahu in their joint declaration. And so I wanted to lay out some thoughts, some initial thoughts about how to transform the ending of the war towards enduring peace. And these are huge tasks that are ahead of us. And there are some points that seems to me, based on comparative analysis of prior events of war ending, that here are a few things that we need to consider. First, the ceasefire vis-a-vis Hamas, I mean, the interaction between Israel and Hamas, has nothing to do with the future of the Gaza Strip. The future of the Gaza Strip won't and should not rely on Hamas. So the question is, what are the institutions that will take us from there, from the ceasefire, to the next level? And so the other group or institutions that we might think of course, is the PA, the Palestinian Authority. But here again, we need to remember that the Palestinian Authority is just a phase that was supposed to last a couple of years under the Oslo Accords towards the establishment of an independent state. So the first point here is to say it's not about Hamas, it's not about the PA, but it's also not only about Israel, whether or not we will have such long-term peace. It's not only about Israel as well. It's about the ability of the Palestinians to construct independent, peace-seeking, democratic institutions. And so the time now is to focus on the role of such institutions. Now, before I hand the mic to Jennifer, I want another layer to add here. For a state building to take place in a proper and lasting way, we must not be focused only on the level of the state alone, but we have to realize the importance of regional integration. And that is true to Israel as well as to the Palestinians. So for these two entities, regional integration, and that could occur potentially in the best way with regional institutions that are not only bilateral agreements if we are to speak about such institutions of regional integration. And this is what I would want us to focus about, this generally 3 points. First, how do we advance independent Palestinian institutions toward independent state? Second, how do we support the future without it being relying neither on the PA, Hamas, or Israel? How do we move beyond veto power to each of these players? And how do we advance regional integration institutions that could hold security and peace for the long term?
Thank you. Now, these are lofty goals, but then again, President Trump's own Gaza Peace Plan, the one that Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister, is supposed to head, is also extremely ambitious. And Jen, you are an expert on local organizations and state building. What is your assessment of the situation right now, the practicality of these designs? Where do you think we're headed?
Thank you very much, Jacob. And it's a real honor to be here along with Ronit and Samer, who I know will be here in just a few minutes. You know, I'm very optimistic about the framework that has been laid out. And I know that because it has taken a long time to get here, and because that there was no rush to put together a so-called day after plan. I know that the Israeli government and President Netanyahu came under a lot of fire for not articulating a very clear day after plan a long time ago. But as someone who studies post-conflict reconstruction and state building, I think the worst thing you can do in this kind of environment is to announce a day after plan before you understand how a war will end. And too often, the state building has been confused with war efforts. And as we know, these are two very distinct and very separate things. So if the Israeli government would have written a day after plan a year ago, for example, before Yahya Sinwar was killed, a plan would look very different from a plan we have today because Hamas was in a very different position. So, that temporal aspect to planning is very, very important. I think we have a better sense now to understanding how this war will end. At least the options seem much more limited because the regional actors have made a clear stance in, signing up for this peace plan. And that's very important. And so I think it speaks to the point that Ronit has made that we can't just see this peace plan as, a deal between the authorities, a future plan for Gaza or a future plan for Palestinian statehood or a peace plan between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. I think we have to understand this in the broader context as a framework for the future of the Middle East. And this is increasingly what this looks like, that peace is not sustainable, I think, without this regional framework. And it's this regional framework that's going to serve both as a guarantor of the peace, but also serve as a roadmap for the way forward. We have seen in places like Afghanistan, where I spent a lot of time, where generals came up with beautiful state building plans, but they were so divorced from reality on the ground that you saw forces fighting for a plan rather than fighting to end a war. And these are two very different things that were always conflated, have always been conflated, I think, in the international interventionist mind as it comes to these kinds of conflicts, that we'll know how this war will end. And from that point, we can begin to vision a future. So I'm very encouraged to see so many international players who are supporting this plan for peace, this roadmap for the way forward, including the Israeli authorities. So I think to Ronit's point, it's almost irrelevant at this point how Hamas will respond. We can't just depend on Hamas's response. I think that the regional actors have articulated what the future will look like. But they could only get to this point once we had a clear understanding of how the war would end.
Ronit, I'm wondering, I'd like to pick up on Jen's point about the regional context in which Israel is functioning. And you had the Abraham Accords, and now you have this potential peace plan. What's your take on how Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Gulf states are responding to all of this? What do you think they envision for the future?
Well, in terms of Saudi Arabia, so it's been over 40 years since they have proposed the first Arab initiative for peace, which included the recognition of the State of Israel by all 22 Arab countries at the time, in return for Israel's recognition of the Palestinian nationhood in Palestine, Israel. And so we know that for long they have been aspiring for such a plan, but still it doesn't mean that we are able to construct with this vision regional institutions. So I want to separate between the two elements. One is the bilateral over the many countries that are involved, but each alone acknowledges Israel and sign up a peace agreement or some lesser valued agreement, such as is currently planned with Syria, but still, this is on a bilateral level, and it says that Israel gains the support of a single Arab country if and only if it acknowledges the independence of the Palestinians. And this is something that the narrative here is wrong. It's a wrong narrative. Israel's place in the Middle East is independent. Of course, it relates, but it not only hinges on what Israel does with respect to the Palestinians. So Israel's place in the Middle East, and you're asking about Egypt and the Gulf and Jordan and the newly built nowadays countries, Lebanon and Syria. What are their approach? Then what I would have to say that we need to move forward for a coordination mechanisms amongst all these countries. And this is something that I believe the Saudis and the Emirates and of course the Egyptians have no issues with. To the contrary, just a few months before October 7th, which we now mention almost 2 years since that horrible day. Just a few months before then, there was the Negev summit next to Ben Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel in the Negev, in the desert, where Emirates and Egyptians and Jordanians, they were all there. And they were trying to establish some joint commission to work together. But then October 7th came and it was all crushed to the ground. So what I'm saying now is that it seems from what we know that the countries that are of interest to us at the regional level are in. Okay, but we need to decouple the question of the future of Palestine from Israel's position. This is so I'm saying it's two things that have to happen at the same time. First, the future of Palestine should not be dependent on what Israel has to do or say. Israel and the Palestinians have a conflict. This conflict won't end soon, But still, for the Palestinians to stand alone as a country, they have a lot to do, and there is a lot to support them in their doing so. And we have to speak, and I'm saying from what I understand from these countries that you've mentioned, Jacob, they're in. But we have to be focused on the importance of that. Now, the thing with the current position of President Trump and the Gulf countries is that it's all about personas. Okay? It's all about the personas involved. And this is something that, for a long-term perspective, isn't sufficient. So I'm saying that we need to think how to transform the energies toward institutions. And there are some seeds for that, because in the 20 points proposal or plan of Trump, there's the idea of a body of peace. So what I'm saying is, let's make this body of peace and a body of integration between countries in the Middle East with even minimal powers. But once we'll have around the same table Palestinians, Israelis, Saudis, Emirates, Qataris, of course, Lebanese, everyone around the table, Turkish, they don't all have to like each other, but they will all drink the same coffee. That would, to my understanding, do a lot. But if you could add from your perspective, Jennifer, if what I'm saying sounds right, if you think of other regions and how they coped or failed to cope. Sorry, Jacob, for taking your role to ask the next question.
You're making my life easy. I actually had a follow-up, but right now I'll defer to you. And Jen, why don't you respond?
Sure. So I think these are obviously very important questions. And I think one of the first questions we have to ask is whether this peace agreement, this deal, let's call it a deal. I don't know what we're calling this, a roadmap for peace, the 20-point plan. But what it de facto does is opens the door for recognition of Israel by all of the countries that have signed this. I mean, Ronit, would you agree with that? Qatar, Indonesia, this is de facto recognition of Israel, right? Of the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but there is deniability. That's what I'm afraid from both parties' point of view.
So now, I think, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I think that's something that we, so I'm going to open the box and talk about comparative cases because there are quite a few that we could think about. But what makes this case quite unique is it's not the recognition of the new entity that is emerging, but the lack of recognition of the dominant power in the region, which is Israel. And that is really quite unprecedented because there are other cases like East Timor or Kosovo, right, where you have a new state emerging as a result of conflict. So you could understand, the state of Palestine emerging from this, from the ashes of this conflict as a new entity. But ironically, what's happened is you have more states in the UN that have recognized this nascent entity than have recognized the state of Israel. And I think that creates a series of complications. And unless that is solidified, much of the roadmap that Ronit has pointed out is going to be, it will face challenges. So unless we see sort of an ex-ante commitment on the part of these states to recognize Israel, you're going to have a hard time with these other kinds of roundtables or the greater integration. Now, it seems that we're on the precipice of this. And it does seem that this deal, this peace agreement, this roadmap is really a roadmap not just for the existence of the Palestinian state, a de jure, a de facto state, but also for the recognition of Israel. Would you agree with that, Ronit?
Yes, and this is why I think that beyond words and mere declarations, once you cooperate, once you work together, that's undeniable. So once you are a member of the same group, then you recognize those who are members. So this is what I'm saying, that if we have this regional, I call it MEUs, the Middle Eastern Union, but it doesn't have to be union in the sense of the European Union. And also the European Union was not the European Union at the first day when the Cole agreement was signed in 51 or so. It evolves over time. So I totally agree with you that it's not only about recognition, but undeniable recognition. That you cannot just wave if something isn't the way you think it should. And this is the role of institutions. This is the role of this seat at the same table that each of us have. And then we have a way to even announce our disagreements. But even if you even if you dismember a state, it doesn't take off its statehood in your eyes. So anyways, back to you, Jacob.
Well, I have a question for you, Ronit, and maybe Jen can tackle it as well, which is you were talking about how it needs to go beyond personas to institutions. However, there's one big persona that is involved in all of this, which is Bibi. And the suspicion has been voiced in Washington that with the opposition on his right flank to the Trump deal, that he's actually not interested in terminating this conflict, but in prolonging it as far as possible. What is your take?
Well, I don't think even Mr. Netanyahu knows the actual truth, because things are changing. But it seems to me to be that Netanyahu was very clear throughout in numerous public speeches that he wishes to see the full integration of Israel in the Middle East. And that is something that he stood by even now, even in his recent speeches. And I think this is something that he wants to be recognized for. And the thing is that we always do this coupling between recognition of the state of Palestine and recognition of Israel as part of the Middle East. And we need to decouple these things, and not in the way that would throw the Palestinians under the wheels of the bus, in the sense that, well, they will just left aside. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need to look at the problems or the issues or what at stake with the Palestinians independent of the Israelis, and to look at as the Israelis independent of the Palestinians. And I think Netanyahu would sign for it, because if at the end of the day there is a Palestinian state that Israel did not recognize but still exists, and you know, over 150 states already recognize the state of Palestine, so it's a fact. You can't say it doesn't exist because Israel does not recognize it. So what I'm saying is that from Netanyahu's point of view, and during war, I don't think it was never his goal. In fact, for years, Netanyahu prevented actions in Gaza because he did not like military operations. And some say that this is what resulted in October 7th, that he was hesitant to act. So it's true that at the moment his coalition is very leaning to the right, and some members of his coalition are not may not see eye to eye with me or even with Netanyahu on the strategic level. But Netanyahu has I think greater ambitions. So I think he's on board, but conditioned that he doesn't have to say the words Palestinian state.
Jen, that was a very lucid answer. Do you have anything to add to that?
So I would just, to consider these points that there's de facto and de jure recognition, right? So it's a de facto entity, and de jure really here depends on the eye of the beholder, right? Is the de jure recognition from Israel, or is it from the international community? But I think the other more important question that gets lost in this discussion is the de facto state. And to me, that's much more important than who recognizes what, is how is the state going to operate? And that's the much more difficult task. It's easy to declare any state a democracy. That's easy. It's easy to have elections. That's easy. It's easy to recognize an entity. No problem. These are very low cost endeavors. And what is much harder is building a governance structure that can sustain a population, that can protect it, and also get along with its neighbors, assuming that's a goal. And what we can take from other cases is that recognition of places like East Timor or Kosovo, the institution building process was simultaneous to this, is that there was big investments in institution building in these cases before the formal recognition, that the international community did have some sort of guarantee or understanding of what the future would look like based on the institutions that were in place. And I think we're still quite far away from that in the case of Palestine, and especially Gaza, right? What will this look like? This agreement helps give greater clarity to, it could be Tony Blair for all we know, but the possibilities have been limited. But the nature of the governance structure, how it will look like, who will be in charge, will this be, a confederation? Will this be a highly centralized state built, based on kind of Arab national models? I think that, Syria is going through this right now, and understanding the nature. And, I think Syria is making some really terrible mistakes in terms of how it's building its governance structure that will have huge implications for the region for years to come. But what those governance structures will look like, what military protection will look like, what local armed forces look like, is going to really determine the future of that state, but also I think the future of the region. So on the one hand, to Ronit's point, yes, we have sort of this regional-based model, or her Middle Eastern Union, which I think is quite an inspiring model to think about everyone sitting around the table, having these discussions, and with some kind of institutional configuration that requires some cooperation. But on the other hand, this sort of bottom-up institutional structures, I think, will determine the viability of this new entity that is emerging and what it looks like in the long term.
So Jen, the dream has been for a unified Middle East. That was Shimon Peres's vision. The former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Rafik Hariri, had a plan for a superhighway from Lebanon to Tel Aviv. Obviously, none of this has happened, and I don't want to play wet blanket, but given your experiences in Afghanistan, you mentioned Kosovo, which seems to be kind of a mess, a drug haven. What would be the prospects for a viable Palestinian state? And the other thing that I wonder about is who would pay for all this? Are you thinking Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states, US financial aid? I'm just curious.
So on the finance side, I think it's much other Arab states have, I think, committed. It's even in that roadmap that there are commitments to sustaining it, and even these European states that have come out and recognition of the state of Palestine in recent weeks. Alongside that recognition does come, I think, some obligations that they're willing to make financially. So this conflict attracts so much global attention that I think it's reasonable to expect a modicum of support, especially from Arab countries. And we've seen promises from the UAE. I imagine Qatar invested quite significantly until just before October 7th. So maybe it's not unreasonable to expect that kind of support to continue. But I would just, of course, Kosovo and East Timor, they're troubled. These are not easy transitions. South Sudan is another example. So we want to think of, comparative cases where you've seen states emerge, smaller states emerge out of conflict. New states emerge. We can debate whether the state of Palestine is a new entity or not, but I think for the purposes of this discussion, it is the recognition of a new state, at least by Israel and the United States. So we do have those experiences. I think South Sudan is the really cautionary tale for all of us. Because I think it goes back to the institutions and the nature of the institutions that were built. While Kosovo may not be utopia, I think it's far from a failure.
Maybe from Sudan, though, is also Iranian meddling, isn't it, in the area? I mean, you have outside powers,
of course,
using it.
So that's where, to Ronit's point, the role of international actors here. We can see the role of international actors has had a huge role in destabilizing this region. And we can see the Abraham Accord sort of emerging as an effort to bring some kind of stability to a region where you have a lot of meddling. And so, to Ronit's point, this is both top down and bottom up. And what she's arguing here is that the regional part, that seeing this sort of as a top down, really is important and often neglected as we think through what the future of this region looks like.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, Jacob.
I'm just going to echo Jen's message in the chat room, which is that if anyone watching this has a question to our distinguished panelists, I am more than happy to pose it. So fire away if you have a question. Right now, I'm going to go to Ronit and ask her, I'm going to give a positive vision now. When Netanyahu embarked upon this Gaza war, I don't think most people expected that it would last this long. And he has been much more audacious, again, than I think anyone expected. You have seen his attack on Iran, which appears to have been successful. We have the crumbling of the Assad regime, and then we have potential rays of hope in Lebanon. Has Netanyahu, whether he realized it or not, has he upended the situation in the Middle East and actually provided the chance or the context for the kind of bold peace that we're talking about, even if he may not have realized it in the beginning?
Well, I don't think it's the actions of Netanyahu that brought to the fall of the Assad regime. But it's true that the past 2 years have shown us that we have reached in the Middle East to a certain point of intensivity of conflicts that are throughout the region. And it's not surprising that they are booming at the same time. That's what I'm saying. So what brought Hamas to pick October 7th as its date of initiating this horrific massacre was exactly the change in the Middle East. It was exactly the public announcements by MBS from Saudi Arabia that we are heading towards peace with Israel. So I'm not saying that it's not the beepers that have brought Lebanon to where it's currently at. Of course, it allowed it, it supported it. It was just another layer of addition. Yes. So I don't think Netanyahu expected it. No one did. But in retrospect, of course, we're all very smart to say that you could see it coming, in the sense that the Assad regime was collapsing, it's other regions but not other, I would say, I'm not sure how to take what's happening in Turkey. It's a territory that we should also consider, because the Kurds in Turkey and in Syria are part of what is currently happening. And I'm not an expert on Turkey, so I wouldn't say about that. But what I'm saying is that things are happening. And you said, let's look at the positive side. And I want to tell you that one thing that I've learned throughout the past 2 years is that people are very, very in difficulties in thinking positively about the future. We only look at the future and say, Hamas would refuse, the war would continue, we will keep clashing. It's all going down the drain. And it doesn't have to be like that. We can plan for success. And the purpose of this talk, when Jen and I spoke about it, was to say, look, there are opportunities. We can lose them. We might not exploit these opportunities, but we have to be focused on what this reality brings about. And the fact that so many regimes have collapsed and changed. And, you know, I would give you another point, another perspective.
Well, let me just intervene here briefly.
Yeah, sure.
It's not that I'm a huge admirer of Bibi, but we have to be fair here. He went after Hamas initially. He targeted Lebanon and he targeted Iran. And everyone thought, you know, before that, you know, that would be going too far. And he has severed Iranian influence in the region. So, I mean, I think in a sense, you have to give him some credit for creating the precondition, don't you?
I'm giving him a lot of credit. And earlier, when you asked me about Netanyahu's position vis-a-vis his government, I said, actually, Netanyahu spoke over and over and over and over about the Iranian axis versus the moderate axis, about the curse and the promise. He's there. That's what I'm saying. And I'm not sure, and time will tell, history will tell, if this is all about specific military actions, because I believe it's always integration of military actions, people's reactions, past, you know, it's many things. So I don't mind giving him credit. I have, but I'm just saying that he says that no one could have expected that. He says so. And what I also wanted to mention that Jennifer also deals with Ukraine and Russia. And this is an element that we need to bring to the table as well. Because for many years, we perceived Russia as a very big threat and as a very big power. And after the Ukrainian war, it seems that it had loosened its position. And we became to understand that, again, I want to leave it to you, Jen, but I'm saying that it also affects the stability of Iran, that Russia is so weak. And this is also something that intervenes in the process that we see the collapse of the old order and the potential establishment of a new one in the Middle East.
Good way of putting it. Jen, what do you have to add to this?
Yeah, so I think that's a really important point. Why this approach to thinking about this as a region is so critical. Because, you know, when I look out into the world, and one of the reasons, you know, Ronit and I began talking about these issues had to do with theoretical issues related to regional integration and dynamics that we're seeing across the world that go far beyond the Middle East, where we're seeing countries that really struggled to work with one another are now working with each other in really new and interesting and I think very positive ways. You know, I spent a lot of time in Central Asia where we're seeing regional integration, maybe that's a strong word for it, but cooperation among states take place in very new ways. We had the first land war between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, interstate conflict. Now these two countries have made amends very quickly and are working together in really new and very positive ways. And I think it has a lot to do with Russia's weakening, And people are looking that now they're looking at Iran as well. And Iran was hoping that Russia would sign this sort of mutual security defense pact with them, and they signed something that looked very much like a wet blanket, right? It wasn't a mutual defense pact as Iran had hoped. So now Iran finds itself increasingly isolated. China remains, I think, a big question and a spoiler in a lot of this, both with Ukraine and with Israel. But these great powers who once exerted influence seem quite distracted with other things. And I think that is shifting the calculus that people have. But I think there's some caution here, right? Some people could argue that the Abraham Accords, or Ronit's beloved Abraham Alliance, which we hope one day will come true, emerged because of Iran, that countries in the region had a real impetus to work together because of the pernicious influence of Iran. But with their role weakening, their influence, we see in the Middle East, Hezbollah, Syria, Gaza, right, throughout the region is diminished, then does Iran's threat actually deter some of this cooperation that we're seeing? What does that look like in the long run? Yeah.
So in his 2024 Atlantic article, Samir talks about, who unfortunately, I guess,
who's delayed on a plane.
So delayed on a plane. We're so sorry he wasn't able to join us thus far, and he's running in the airport in trying to find a place that he can.
So hopefully he'll join us. Let's remain optimistic. Yeah.
He talks in his Atlantic piece about why he believes there can indeed be a lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Now, and he points out that the majority of Palestinians, in fact, are not hell-bent on conflict. They want to live peaceful lives, just like everybody else. What sort of economic incentives do you envision as part of state building if there were a Palestinian state? And more broadly, a lot of people say the two-state solution is dead. Why isn't it?
Is it for me or for Jen?
For both of you. We'll start with Jen.
Sorry, you're muted.
I said both of you. We'll start with Jen.
No, let's start with Ronit.
Oh, you want to start with Ronit? Okay.
Okay.
You're passing the buck.
I don't think the two-state solution is dead, but I think the many-state solution should be more on the table than we perceive it. And one of the ideas that I try to advance is a mode of confederation. Now, we have very little examples in the world for confederations, because most of confederative organizations turn out to be federative. And there's a huge difference. Now, in a piece that I wrote that will be published by the center that Jen runs, I showed that in the past, over 100 years ago, there were discussions between Arab and Jewish Zionist leaders about confederative options for the Middle East, for Israel, Jordan, Palestinians, Lebanon, Syria. So these ideas were on the table in the past. And I think that once we will be able to understand that confederation does not eliminate the needs of different cultures within a region. So it's not about separation. Separation won't work. Everyone who thinks that Israelis can be separated from Palestinians is totally mistaken. This is not a vision to hold. So in that sense, so if you envision two separated states, I agree that we are beyond this point, but I would also say that we were never at the point that was that made this possible. To the fact, in 1947, there was a very specific proposal of a two-state solution that even that, right, the partition resolution, even in the partition resolution, there were articles discussing the idea of integration in economic terms. So even then, when the two-state solution was an actual option, integration was needed. Nowadays, there is no other way than integration. However, each of these entities and other parts of the Middle East, they need to have cultural rights, identity acknowledgement. And this is why the two-state solution is not beyond us, but the many-state solution for the region that are all sharing some joint commitments to resolving conflicts in peace, to share infrastructure, to share knowledge, to support each other at crises. These are things that are not imaginable only. They are really, really in our hands. And so I don't want to sound as if I'm dreaming, because what I'm saying is that it has passed, it has comparative examples, but we're always focused on what Israel would do vis-a-vis the Palestinians. So we lose the opportunities that is now open to us because Netanyahu, if you want, I don't mind. But anyways, there's a huge opportunity now, and we have to take it in our hands. So it's not only the question of the two-state solution, it's a question of the full integration of different countries in the regions and their stability. And here's summer, at last.
Excellent. Is he
Well, good morning. I'm so sorry for the delay, but
not at all?
there
You
was a
came
delay
just
in the
in
fly,
time.
and so I am in a corner in an airport. So I hope that it will be quiet enough, and I will be able to have my voice heard. So thank you so much for invitation, and
So
I'm happy to be part of this webinar.
thank you. Let me ask you, because Ronit and we were just discussing, her point was that there's too much focus on Israel in isolation, if I'm conveying her thoughts accurately, and that there's a wider chance for peace in the Middle East that would consist of some kind of confederation or confederative structure. What's your take on that? And maybe Ronit wants to spell that out more if I'm not fleshing it out adequately.
Okay. Well, I always say that we are always one Israeli election away from peace. It has been from 1967 until today. We were always trying to convince 51%, or the only way to be able to achieve peace, to have political horizons, is to convince 51% of the Israelis to vote in any coming elections for this option. I'm not sure if really pressure, international isolation, these kind of steps will help convincing the Israelis. I think they might do the opposite. I can understand the reaction of the whole world. I can understand the diplomatic move now that have been led by European state. And I think it's mainly motivated by local needs. The streets are boiling in London and Paris and Brussels, and the leaders, they needed to do something. So instead of resorting to economic sanctions, for example, the two that have been decided against Russia, they prefer to do some tough love to Israel. Recognizing a Palestinian state instead of, and they know that recognizing a Palestinian state will not harm the Israelis or Israel, but still it upset the Israelis and Israel. What we need to do is that as Palestinians, instead of investing a lot of energy into trying to convince the whole world to recognize the Palestinian state, we need maybe resort this energy into trying to convince 51% of the Israelis to vote for the two-state options. I can reach to 190 states that recognize the state of Palestine. If Israel is not one of them, nobody will be able to deliver statehood for us as Palestinians. Now,
I
this
want to
brings
ask
me,
you, sorry. So,
yes,
sorry,
this
Summer,
brings
for
me,
interrupting, but really, if you could just say, why isn't it that the future of Palestine is dependent on what Israel would do? This is
well,
what
because
troubles me.
they took the call. Let me try to be practical, Ronnie. I am a patriot Palestinian. I spent my whole life in politics. I was in Israeli jails at the age of 15 for 5 years. So I really, my dream is to have statehood. I spent my life into trying to reach there. But let's go to politique real. It's not going to happen unless 51% of the Jewish voters will vote in an election that will create a coalition that is ready to take this path. Nothing else will help us. It is dependent on Israel. It is in the hand of Israel. And it is only in the hands of Israel. Nothing else will help us. So we need to focus there. We need to focus into talking to the Israelis. We, the Palestinians, we need to shift strategy. Our strategy now that is depending in using pressure. Pressure is sometimes violence in the street and sometimes diplomatic moves internationally. You Israelis, Ronit, and you know it very well, you don't respond positively to pressure. You become more stubborn. Look back to the famous statement of Netanyahu when he said Sparta. The whole world is wrong. And you in Israel, you are right. That's part of the reaction of the Israeli society to pressure. The only chance we have with you is to try to create a narrative, to create attitude, to build up a strategy that can touch your hearts and minds. If I can, in the coming elections, now there is an election in 2026. Some Israelis hope it will be early elections, but it is scheduled at 27th of October 2026. If in that elections, two things will happen, we could have a chance for peace. First of all, if the Arab Israelis vote in a higher percentage, instead of 42% to 73%, which is the common average, then we will have around 17, 18 MKs, Arab MKs. And then if we are the Palestinian, it's only us, the Palestinian, can move the hearts and minds of 300, 400,000 Israeli Jewish voters to vote instead of right-wing, center-left. Then we will have a coalition that will move with us towards a political horizon. Let me speak a little bit about Trump plan. I guess it's part of the discussion in this webinar. If you have noticed that, first of all, I think it is a very important move because Trump is behind it. Trump has showed determination that he wants to end the war in Gaza. And he put his 20 points plan. If you have noticed, there was no Palestinian element in that plan. I mean, nobody consulted any Palestinians in it. Even when President Trump has done the press release in the White House, he has given credit to all the Arab leaders in the region. He mentioned them one by one, but he mentioned no Palestinian at all. So the Palestinians are not there in that initiative. Yet, it is very important for us because this is the only option that is on the table. Because the alternative is the continuation of the chaos now, the suffering in Gaza. We are losing around 200 lives daily in Gaza. But we should not be very optimistic. Each point of them needs a lot of the negotiations in details. And if we go back to 1996, when Netanyahu, in a similar situation, was pushed by a different American president to sign or to accept the Heilbrunn Accord, it took him months in the negotiation. He instructed his negotiators to spend as much time as possible in every detail, including, for example, the width and the height of the sidewalk in Ashuhada Street in Heilbrunn for 4 weeks, and they were negotiating if it is 1.5 meter or 1 meter 20 centimeters. So there is still a long way until this plan can be transferred into details. But I think all the sides, including Hamas, that up till now, they did not give a final answer on it. But noticing what's happening on the ground in Gaza, today, for example, there was a fight between the Arrow unit of Hamas, a Sahem unit, and a big tribe in Khan Yunis. And the results was that 33 fighters of Hamas were killed in some kind of a civil war in Gaza. So Hamas is losing its control on the ground, and this is a lot of tension. They need this ceasefire. They are under a lot of pressure. And I think all the Arab countries are trying to push. So the percentage of success for this plan will be very high. Another important development is happening on the Palestinian side, and this is on Abbas' side. On Sunday, Abbas will convene the Central Committee of Fatah, and he will announce the welcoming back of Nasser al-Qudwa, his political revival, the person that he deported him in 2021. He's accepting him back because there is a lot of pressure from the Arab countries that he needs to go into a path of real reforms and not cosmetic reforms. The whole region now is not accepting appointing a vice president to be taken from Abbas, a corrupt vice president, to be taken by Abbas as enough reforms. So there is a lot of preparation internally. There is a lot of elements inside the Palestinian politics, both in Gaza and Ramallah, that shows that everything is pushing towards accepting this plan and going into this path. I've heard the last part of your remarks, Ronit, about two-state separation, integration. Well, I think after the 7th of October, we might have learned some lessons. We should go through a phase of separation, maybe temporary, maybe until we are able to have some kind of reconciliation. The main obstacle here that is preventing Israelis and Palestinians to think in a smarter way, to understand better this conflict, and to think in a smarter way for an exit out of this conflict, is the cocktail of hard feelings that is occupying our hearts. Both Palestinians and Israelis have their hearts filled of anger, of sadness, and I can say hatred. And it needs a lot of effort from serious leaders, a process top down. It does not come bottom up. It needs a change of leadership first, and then these leaderships should set example of reconciliation, of cooperation, of mutual understanding, and start forcing policies that will go down until it touches the bases. Okay, reconciliation is very important before we become, more integrated. Historically, let us see. I am convinced that the only solution is the two-state solution now. Anything else is not solution, because anything else will mean that one side has defeated the other. A two-state solution is the best option that we have now. But historically, let's think about it a little bit. I am one of person that believes we need, as Palestinians, to change our narrative. It's a prerequisite. It's a precondition that can help us attract the Israelis towards trusting us again. We need to change our narrative by recognizing the historical rights and links of Jews in this land. Okay, because this is a historical fact. Why do I continue to deny 3,500 years of historical facts? Jews have been here. And I cannot continue denying in my narrative saying that their presence here is linked to a might and not to a right. Their presence here should be understood by us as Palestinians that it is an issue of a right. But we should also remind them that they have never been alone here, that there was always others, and these others are us. So the conflict here is not who belongs and who does not belong. The conflict here should be, the question should be, how do we both belong? So if we both recognize our historical links to this land, think about it. Always the Jewish people, they had the presence in this land, in land of Israel, more in the mountains of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, rather than the seashore. While the Palestinians always, the link to this land was more in the seashore than the West Bank and Gaza. Yet now the two-state solution is giving the Jewish people a state over the seashore and giving the Palestinian a state over the West Bank. In our collective memory, still Jews will remember their history in Heilbrunn, while their state is in Haifa and Jaffa and Beersheba and the whole Israel on the borders of 67. And we Palestinians, we will continue to have collective memory that links us to Haifa and Jaffa. In a way or another, our connectivity to the land, symbolically, will continue to be, we need to address it in the two-state solution. We need to see how Israelis and Jews can continue to have this link with the mountains of the West Bank, and the Palestinians can continue feel connected to Jaffa and Haifa. It is not easy. It is complicated. But most importantly, we need to have goodwill. We need to start focusing on how to bring Israelis and Palestinians to their naturality by nature. We have 3,500 years of coexistence. Things went wrong only in the last 100 years. So we have common history that will be able to open doors for common future if we have proper leadership that is ready to understand the needs of Israelis and Palestinians.
But what kind of state, Palestinian state, can be constructed out of the hodgepodge of the West Bank?
Let me tell you something. Now everybody is focusing about the D word, demilitarized. I'll tell you something, it's not enough. There should be 3 Ds in the Palestinian state. It should be demilitarized, developed, and democratic. If one of them is missing, it will not be sustainable. It will not be sustainable next to Israel, because you cannot live next to a vibrant democracy, a startup nation, and you can be a third world country.
Speaking of a third world country.
Whoops.
Although he's not in Israel or Palestine.
Well, that was a strong, oh, here, I think he's back.
I have to ask something. I have to ask some.
Go ahead.
If you allow me. Sama, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Maybe I disconnected for some seconds. Sorry.
I have to ask you something. As a Jerusalemite, both of us,
Yes.
we know
Yeah.
the city cannot be divided. We know
Yeah.
it. There is actual segregation in neighborhoods, but there is no separation. I have 2 questions to you regarding East Jerusalem. First is, would you encourage Jerusalemites to become Israeli citizens in order to flip the outcome of the coming elections? Because I believe not many know, but there are about 200,000 Palestinians living in East Jerusalem that potentially could have Israeli citizenship. They need to apply for it. They need to make some statements maybe. But currently they are only residents of Israel, but they are not, they are permanent residents, but they are not citizens, so they cannot vote. So my first question to you is, given what you have said, that we need to flip the results of the election, would you recommend, would you come out with a public statement calling Jerusalemites to become citizens in order to take part in the election? And the second question I have to you is, given what we know about the life of Israelis and Palestinians in Jerusalem, wouldn't you agree that it's only integration
Now we lost you, Ronnie.
that would lead us to
You got the,
reconciliation?
I think you got the gist of it.
Should I
Integration will lead to reconciliation, I think is what she said. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
repeat again?
So
Can you hear me? Integration will lead to
Go
okay,
ahead.
and to the flip in the
well, let me just correct the number. There are 400,000 Jerusalemite Palestinians.
yeah, they're not above
Muslim,
18. They're not above 18.
not above 18. I have alone nine kids. So we are in East Jerusalem. We are, you can consider us Haredim in the size of the family. Well, the question more, Ronit, is not, well, I would like now to call Israel to change its policy and allow Palestinians in East Jerusalem automatically to be citizens of Israel. Well, the problem here is inside Israel. I cannot understand why Israel claims that Jerusalem is the united eternal capital of Israel, while 40% of its inhabitants are non-citizens. I haven't seen an example like this in the whole world. Give me one capital in the world where 40% of its inhabitants are not citizens. And until when? If Israel claims now in the Knesset and in the public opinion that there will be no compromise on Israel, why are you keeping 400,000 inhabitants of the city as residents and not citizens? What will this cost you? Another 2 Arab MKs in the Knesset, doesn't it worth it for you to claim real ownership of the city? The problem here is on the Israeli side, Ronnie. It's not on the Palestinian side. Trust me, there is a trend of asking for Israeli citizenship, and I'll tell you why. Not because the Palestinians in East Jerusalem are in love affair with Israel, more because they see this way of acquiring Israeli citizenship, it's a way for resilience, for them to be able to stay in Jerusalem and not be kicked out of Jerusalem. But despite this wave of requesting Israeli citizenship, the acceptance rate is 5%. So out of each 100 Palestinians in East Jerusalem that apply for citizenship, only 5 gets it. So this question is in the hands of the Israeli decision makers. It's not in the hands of the Israelis. But there is a way for us to fulfill our both aspirations in Jerusalem. And I think the political solution could be simple as this. All the Jewish neighborhoods, including those in East Jerusalem, like Neve Yaakov, like Pisgat Ze'ev, like Gilo, are part of Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel. All the Palestinian neighborhoods in the city can be Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Palestine, except the old city. In the old city, we cannot raise any flag. There cannot be an Israeli flag. There cannot be a Palestinian flag. The old city should be managed by a committee of 5 countries, for example, USA, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. They should manage it in a way that it will allow a freedom of worship for everybody, freedom of movement, freedom of visiting. Each religious authority can take control of its holy site, but the city is open for everybody to visit and to pray. Currently, the issue of prayer of non-Muslims in Al-Aqsa or non-Jews in the Kotel or non-Christians in certain church is a political statement more than it is religion. There is nothing in Islam that prevents a Jew to pray in any mosque. The status quo now that does not allow others to pray but to visit is a status quo that is merely under the pressure of politics and not a requirement by religion. So it is not complicated. If there is a political will on both sides, if there will be a change in leadership on both sides. Currently, the Palestinians are hostages in the bunkers of Abbas for 20 years. And I can say the Israelis have been under the magic of Bibi for another 20 years also. So most of the Israelis and Palestinians in the last 20 years did not know leaders except of Abbas and Bibi. And I don't think that this couple were able to work together or each alone into trying to push things positively. President Abbas has done business with 8 Israeli prime ministers out of 14 in the history of Israel. He couldn't succeed with any of them. He has done business with 6 American presidents, and he couldn't achieve anything with any of them. And he still wants, at the age of 90, to continue trying. A change of leadership is the key. And here, if we are speaking about Israeli elections and trying to see, hopefully, how we can impact positively, touch the hearts of the Israeli voters in the coming elections, I would like to tell you that the Palestinian election is more important. It is due already 20 years. And there is a momentum now that there was a commitment by President Abbas in his letter on 9th of June that he submitted to President Macron, President Trump, and to MBS, where he committed to a Palestinian presidential and legislative elections within 1 year in paragraph 4 of page 4 of that letter. So there is a momentum now. If we, the Palestinians, have our election before the Israeli elections, and first of all, we defeat Hamas in that election, because trust me, the continuation of the war in Gaza will not defeat Hamas. The only way to defeat Hamas is in the election boxes. If we defeat Hamas in the election boxes, and the Israelis see that 90% of Palestinians voted against Hamas, they will realize a change. This will help. If we elect in that election a leadership that is not Hamas and not Abbas, a leadership that is more young, energetic, that understands the Israelis, that knows how to talk to the Israelis in closed room and in media and in public and in academia, and that can talk to Israel from wall to wall. Even they can find a common ground with the right, with the center, with the left. If such a Palestinian leadership comes to power, and the Israelis feel that these leadership are sincere, there are new Palestinians, we have rebirthed the Palestinians. Forget about the old Palestinians. Forget about the Palestinians who took wrong decisions in 1947 and wrong decisions in the Second Intifada and the 7th of October. Forget about them. Now we have the new Palestinians. This will have impact on the Israelis. This will be able to also force some positive change on the Israeli side. So sometimes the solutions are internally more than they are in the international diplomatic arena or by a war machine.
So we are
The
not in
solutions are
disagreement. We are not in disagreements. This is what I was saying, that part of the story with the future of the Palestinian people depends on the Palestinians and on your elections and on your leadership and on your institutions. It doesn't all rest on what Israel would do or wouldn't do. Of course, it affects a lot, but still there's huge progress that has to be done on the Palestinian side. And what I'm saying is that from an Israeli point of view, hearing you is so inspiring because you are one of the few Palestinian people that is willing to speak about Palestinians' responsibility to reform genuinely and not only about what Israel does or doesn't do. And this is what I'm speaking about. This is where we need to shift the focus. And for Israelis to hear that, that is like oil in our ears. It's something that is very inspiring because we say, all right, you're willing to take responsibility. And it's not to you, Samer, which I so admire, but you know, this language of responsibility taking and future looking that isn't only focusing on Israel is so very rare. And this was my point, that it is very important to decouple the future of Palestine from Israel's actions. It also depends on what Palestinian leadership and people, what you'll do. And if attention is given to that, we can move, I believe, forward.
Maybe, but you
Well,
still
yes.
have a far-right government that Netanyahu is presiding
We'll
over.
have election in a year, as Summer said. We are facing elections, and for these elections, we have running leaders who have no idea of in what ways they are different than Netanyahu. They don't have a plan. They don't have, you can't differentiate them from Netanyahu. Bennett, Gantz. What I'm saying is that they are substitute and of lesser charisma for Netanyahu. And for this reason, I'm not only troubled with our elections, I'm also troubled with what we can give our people. I'm talking from an Israeli point of view. And to hear someone saying, we need to have elections, we need to have democratic country, we need to have demilitarized and developed, and we need to understand how these things are happening and what can we gain in order to secure that. And you know, Samuel, that in the Macron MBS declaration, there is so very little that is said exactly about that. It is only says there should be reforms in the PA. The PA should be abolished if we want to think of a state, right? So what are the stepping stones towards this end?
Well, the cornerstone for me, you know, I wrote op-ed in Le Figaro on the 22nd of September when President Macron was doing his announcement in New York.
Le Monde, on the Le Monde.
No, on Le Figaro. On Le Figaro, it's the right wing. It's the right wing newspaper in France. And I am a person that have been very much engaged with the French politics recently. I've met President Macron 3 times in different occasions, and I have good contacts with all the diplomats who were calling the shot. But yet, I was forced to have the title of that op-ed in a way that it was felt as if it is a criticism and attack to President Macron, because the title said President Macron's empty applause for Abbas is a betrayal for the Palestinian democracy, because the French leadership started giving a pass to Abbas on the elections. They started considering appointing the deputy president, who is the most corrupt person, as a step of reform. That changing the heads of the Palestinian security agencies by appointing the bodyguards of Abbas as head of these agencies as a step of reform. That, for example, working the curriculum, changing the incitement and hatred in the textbooks is enough as a reform. I have nothing against changing the curriculum, but what I say, you can change the textbooks. But if you are forcing this and you are not changing the way the Palestinians are thinking, we will change the books, but we will not be able to control the discussion in the classrooms. You know, these leadership, they are marketing themselves, Abbas and his people, they are marketing themselves to the world that, yes, we are unpopular, but the Palestinian people is required to do unpopular decisions that require unpopular leadership, which is bullshit. Unpopular decisions need to have popular leadership because the leadership needs to market it. We need the Palestinians to start thinking differently. We need the Palestinians to start believing that our best option with the Israelis is dialogue, and that we cannot continue not recognizing their rights and existence. I said that we need to change the narrative, but we also need to build up a strategy, a Palestinian strategy, that puts the Israeli security in its bases. Not to do the Israelis as a favor, but out of a higher Palestinian national interest. We will not be able to take the Israelis in a kamikaze jump towards the two-state solution. We need to defeat the fear in their hearts. This conflict, in the eyes of the Israeli, is only one word: security. 85% of Israel. Yes, there is 15% of Israel that this conflict for them is ideology, some kind of ideology. The majority of Israelis, they are not able to accept that option because they are not able to trust that this state is not going to be another example of Hamas in Gaza and 7th of October. So if we put a strategy that focuses on delivering security to the Israelis, and we defeat that fear in the heart of the Israelis, we will be able to move. The third decision, which is the most complicated and the hardest among all, we need to redefine the right of return. If we want two-state solution, I cannot flood Israel with 6 million refugees. Because if Israel will withdraw from the West Bank and Gaza, it will withdraw because there need to be able to protect Israel as a Jewish democratic state. They need a demographic majority of Jews in their state. So I cannot say two-state solution and then you need to absorb 6 million Palestinians. We need to redefine the right of return to be the right of return to the Palestinian state and not to the place where the grandfather and grandmother has left inside Israel. These are very hard decisions. Most of the Palestinian leadership will say that the right of return is individual right. And no leadership has the agency to decide on it. It's not correct. When a Palestinian leadership comes by fair and free election, and it comes with a program, with a campaign, election campaign that says, I will change the right of return. The two-state solution requires this. This is my plan how to reach there. This is the way to the state solution. That the way to the two-state solution does not go via Washington or Berlin or Cairo. It goes only via Tel Aviv and Rishon LeZion and Zichron Yaakov and every Israeli and Palestinian and every Israeli city and village. And we need to reach to the hearts of the Israeli and provide for them security in order to be there. If we convince the Palestinians and take this agency, then we have the agency to sacrifice the individual rights for the benefit of the collective. So this the kind of changes that we should do. And I agree with you, Ronit. We should start. I wrote an op-ed in Haaretz a few months ago where I said that the Palestinians should start the first steps of change. Yes. Why do we need to start the change? Why do we feel that we have the obligation to start the change? Because we are under a sense of urgency more than you, the Israelis. You pay the price of this conflict, but you still have a big army, very powerful. You have a stable state, startup nation, OECD country. You have a passport that connects you with 160 countries without a need of visa. We don't have any of this. We have 2 million people in Gaza under plastic tents now. So we have a sense of urgency. We need to start the change, focusing on the Palestinian change. Stop lecturing the Israelis. Instead of telling the Israelis what they should do, we should start doing what we should do and set an example to them. and then they will follow. This is the only way. I don't find something else that can work.
Well, I am grateful to you, Samer, and glad that you managed to come on and enliven our conversation. We're obviously not going to solve the Middle East peace here in this webinar, as valiant as our efforts are, and we've gone way over time. So I would like to thank everyone for participating, and this only means that we will need to reconvene this webinar when Jen is ready for another round. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacob. It was good to see you, Samer. And thank you for your comments. And thank you, Ronit, for bringing us all together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It was very important. So I appreciate everyone's participation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Shalom.